Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Them Tennessee Vols heading into 2025. They just seem to be a program that is flying under the radar. And this is a Tennessee team that at times in the 2024 year, I was up banging the table as one of the best teams in the country. They made the college football playoffs, lost to the future national champs, and all of a sudden people are just kind of out on the Tennessee Vols heading into 2025. Now, why might that be the case? I think one, the sky high expectations on Nico going into 2024, they probably didn't get lived up to. And now you got all of these people in the college football landscape just assuming that Nico ain't that good of a quarterback. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks over the last couple of years maybe take some lumps year one as starters and take massive jumps going into year two as a starter. Look, Nico was a second year kid in the 2024 season, first year as a starter. To make the assumption that Nico is not going to get better heading into 2025 is an assumption that I think is a mistake. And then I think the second reason, and a reason I have question marks about Tennessee, is you just lose so much along the line of scrimmage, which was quietly really one of the best aspects of this football team in the 2024 year. On the surface, you're losing a lot of really good football players, right? A couple of guys on the offensive line that have played a lot of football. You go to the defensive line, guys like James Pierce, Mari Thomas, Norman Lott. You do lose a lot of really good football players. There's no question about that. But then when you start to build out this depth chart and look at all the blue chip talent that Tennessee has stockpiled, especially along the line of scrimmage, you start to not get all that concerned. And I think another reason that Tennessee might be flying under the radar is they were not one of those teams that went into the transfer portal and grabbed 10 plus guys. They grabbed a few and a couple of guys that I think will start for Tennessee, but they didn't go and overturn their roster. Now, there's two ways to look at that. One is, well, you didn't get better in the transfer portal. It didn't get that much better in the transfer portal. The other way of looking at it is Josh Heupel has quietly done a very good job on the recruiting trail the last couple of years. And although you lose a lot of NFL talent that is going to the NFL draft, you start looking at this depth chart and say, a lot of blue chip line of scrimmage players, a lot of guys that Tennessee probably likes a lot heading into 2025, because if they didn't, they probably would have went to the transfer portal and grabbed some more names. Now, as we go into spring practice, there are some intriguing storylines that I think are worth noting for this Tennessee football team. Boo Carter on the offensive side of the football getting some reps. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Mike Matthews potentially having a monster year in 2025. Before we get into it, as always, to the Tennessee fans, appreciate you guys. And although this was a team that, we didn't talk all that much about in the offseason just because there wasn't that much to talk about in terms of transfer portal moves, it's going to be really fun talking about this Tennessee team in spring practice, not necessarily because of all the new faces, but you have a few guys like David Sanders. But I think more importantly, all these guys going into year two and year three, like what do they look like in spring practice is largely going to determine what this Tennessee team is in 2025. I'm fired up to get into it. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with Boo Carter getting some reps at wide receiver. Now, why is this potentially in I don't know if I go as far and say it's a huge deal for Tennessee going into 2025, because I would be surprised if Boo Carter plays significant football on the offensive side of the football. But you go back to 2024 and look at one of the things that was probably just missing in this Tennessee offense, guys who excelled with the football in their hands, especially at the pass catcher position. Yards after the catch. Tennessee had 1,200 yards after the catch all year. Now, in comparison to some of the better offenses that we saw in the country, Ohio State over 2,000, Oregon over 2,200. That number is really low. And then you go back and watch some of these Tennessee games back and you kind of look at the personnel. Squirrel White was historically kind of that yards after the catch guy for Tennessee. Wasn't that guy in Tennessee for Tennessee in 2024. Dante Thornton, he's a guy that's really, really fast, but he's kind of just a guy that's fast in a straight line. He doesn't have a ton of shake to him. He's not going to be a guy that is going to be dynamic after the catch. And then a guy like Brew McCoy, who's kind of a bigger body possession wide receiver. Guess that's a long way of saying that Tennessee didn't have a lot of guys that you were scared of when they had the football in their hands at the wide receiver position. Boo Carter is that guy. Now, do I think Boo Carter starts every single game at wide receiver and plays 80% of the snaps? No, I don't. But he's a guy that you can inject into this offense for maybe 10 to 15 snaps a game and really add a dynamic football player with the ball in his hands. And that's something that Tennessee missed. I mean, you go back to the Boo Carter's film coming out of high school, we talked about it. Probably going to play nickel at the college ranks, but a guy that you could certainly see in the future getting some opportunities on the offensive side of the football because he's just too good with the football in his hands to not play him on offense. I think that's a more intriguing story to monitor than most people will say because Tennessee was missing a kind of guy like that in the 2024 year. Second big storyline, Mike Matthews. Disappointing year as a freshman. I think a lot of people had some high expectations for Mike Matthews as a freshman, probably didn't reach those expectations. Him going into year two is a massive storyline because you look at Tennessee, it was probably a disappointing year from the wide receivers as a whole. You're kind of looking for that bona fide wide receiver one. Mike Matthews can be that guy. Why do I have so much confidence that he can be a wide receiver one? Because he's a multidimensional wide receiver. And you go back to the 2024 season, I think one of the things that probably frustrated me the most about the wide receiver room was you had a lot of one-trick ponies. Squirrel White, slot wide receiver that can separate short, intermediate, maybe be a guy after the catch, but he just wasn't as good as we thought he was going to be in the 2024 season. Go to Brew McCoy, big body possession wide receiver. You go to Dante Thornton, just a linear vertical guy. There was no wide receiver that just checked a lot of boxes. That's what makes Mike Matthews special as a wide receiver. He can be a possession wide receiver at 6'1", 200 plus pounds. He can be a separator. He can give you yards after the catch. You didn't have that true wide receiver one in this Tennessee offense in the 2024 year. The early parts of spring practice, from what we're hearing, it sounds like Mike Matthews could be that guy for Tennessee. The last thing that I will note about the early returns from Tennessee spring practice, and it's not really Nico. I think a lot of Tennessee fans are, all right, what are we hearing from Nico coming out of spring? You just want to hear consistency from Nico, at least in my opinion, where I know Nico can make the draw-dropping throws. We've been watching this kid since his sophomore year of high school. What kind of got Nico as a young quarterback in 2024 was just the misses. I don't need to hear anything special from Nico in the 2020 during this offseason. All I want to hear is he has command of the offense and he's accurate with the football. That's all we hear from Nico. That's a good thing heading into 2025. The last thing that I'll say is the line of scrimmage looks deep, but from the spring practice clips that I have seen, and I get it, we're just in shorts and a t-shirt right now, the line of scrimmage players looked apart. And that's probably been the biggest step in the right direction that we've seen from Tennessee under Josh Heupel. And I think Josh Heupel, go back to 2022 when Tennessee's offense was elite. Okay, we had one of the best offenses in the country. What was holding Tennessee back from being at the top of the SEC? It was line of scrimmage players. Georgia just looked different than Tennessee did along the lines of scrimmage. Josh Heupel clearly noticed that and has put a ton of emphasis and resources and time and effort to really getting bodies on the line of scrimmage out of the high school ranks that rival programs like Alabama and Georgia. And I'm watching Tennessee in 2024. You saw it. And now you go into 2025, you kind of see just the early spring practice clips. This team looks like a dominant SEC team along the line of scrimmage. Now, I know that body types aren't everything, but at the end of the day, football, it's a size, speed sport. If you simplify the game of football down to the core, it's, do we have bigger, stronger, faster players than the team that we are playing? And the way I see this Tennessee line of scrimmage players, I'm saying they look like one of the more physically advanced teams that you see in the country. That was the key for Tennessee in 2024. That's going to be the key for them in 2025. They didn't have the flashy offseason that you saw a lot of other programs had. They certainly have some probably more question marks than they had back in 2024, going into 2024. But there are a lot of answers on this Tennessee team as well, and we will kind of figure out those answers as spring practice plays on. Wanted to hop on and talk about just some early returns, what we are looking for. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.